Hipsetter improves your posture by targeting what is known as the deep front myofascial line in the body, also known as the posture line. There are 12 myofascial lines in the body. These are groups of muscles, ligaments, tendons, and other tissues grouped together that move the body in one of many ways. To illustrate myofascial lines, I've used a series of bungee cords that show how certain myofascial lines attach to the body and how they allow the body to move. For instance, there's this line here, which is called the superficial front line, and when it flexes, it causes the body to bend forward. And consequently, we have on the back, we have what's called the superficial back line, which when it tightens, it causes the body to extend backwards in this way. And we have different lines on the body that cause the body to twist or to bend sideways. So all these myofascial lines are working together to move us around and allow us to do the many things that the human body is capable of doing. There's 12 myofascial lines in all, but only one of them runs on the inside of the skeleton. If you notice, all of these myofascial lines that I've indicated, they're all attached to the skeleton on the outside of the body. So these muscles are on the outside of the skeleton. But then there's this one, which is the deep front line, which runs inside of the skeleton. The deep front line runs along the midline of your body from your feet all the way up to your head and through the deepest parts of your body. This is your deep core, or this is your deepest core. And this is the core that we're targeting with Hipsetter. Hipsetter does not target the external abs or the back muscles or anything like that. It targets the muscles of the deep front line, or your deepest core. Because as I already said, the deep front line is also known as the posture line. This line doesn't move you around, it provides structure and stability, which allows the other muscles that do move us around to do their work. Now, when the deep front line loses tone or strength, the body essentially begins to collapse in on itself. It doesn't have the internal scaffolding, so to speak, to allow us to be upright in a strong and effortless way. And so what we see with different postures or different postures that are failing is some type of collapse. You could imagine it when you see them now. If someone's really slumped over, it's not so much that the back muscles aren't able to keep them up, it's that they're collapsing from the inside. The deep front line is not able to do its work to provide internal structure. Same thing with anterior pelvic tilt or excessive lumbar lordosis or something like that. Again, these are situations where the deep front line has lost tone and has lost its ability to create internal stability and structure. And so the external body begins to collapse in on itself. Now, when this happens, the body senses lack of stability, which it also interprets as lack of strength. And it will transfer function that the deep front line is no longer providing to the external outer lines and ask them to produce posture and structure, which they were never intended to do. But as a backup system, they are able to do it. There is still an internal feeling of weakness, weak core, or whatever people may describe it as. And so I think that's where the incessant need to make the core stronger by doing ab exercises and back exercises ad infinitum, but all being done with the external lines. The idea is to replace the function that has been lost because the deep front line is no longer doing its job. So let's look at one example, which would be an anterior pelvic tilt. I've removed all of the myofascial line bungee cord things except for 3 to illustrate what's going on with an anterior pelvic tilt and why the current most popular approaches to correct it don't really work that well. So with an anterior pelvic tilt, what we have is a pelvis that has fallen too far forward. And in doing this, it's created an excessive curve in the lumbar spine because the pelvis has fallen forward. Now, when this happens, as you can see, if this was a normal posture, and these are our ab muscles here in blue, and then these are our back muscles here in red, and then on the inside in red and black, this is the deep front line. And so as you can see, the abdominal muscles, the ab muscles, they're attached to the pubic bone and to the rib cage. And when this tightens, of course, it's gonna cause this to happen, okay? And by default, if this is happening on the front side, then the back muscles are getting longer or stretching. But in the case of an anterior pelvic tilt, what most people think is happening is that the back muscles have gotten really tight, and so they're tightening and causing the pelvis to fall forward, along with hip flexors and other things on the front side. And they will also say that the abdominal muscles over here have gotten weak, right? And that if a person can strengthen these abdominal muscles so that they can tighten more, then it'll pull the pelvis back forward. And also because the back muscles are really tight, then part of that therapy is to stretch the back muscles. So we're doing two things. We're trying to stretch the back muscles and tighten the abdominal muscles, hopefully to get back to a place where the spine has normal curve and a normal orientation with the pelvis. But that's not really what's happening in the opinion of myself and many other experts. What really has happened and what has caused the pelvis to fall forward is that the deep front line here has lost tone, or said another way, it normally supports the lumbar spine. It normally supports the lumbar spine from the front. And as it loses tension, it starts to sag. So then the lumbar spine doesn't have support from the inside. So it sags, and as it sags, then the pelvis falls forward. So now the deep front line is lost tone, it's slack. And it doesn't matter if you tighten the abs or if you lengthen the back muscles. That's not fixing the fact that in here, it's still slack. And what needs to happen is that the deep front line needs to be exercised so that it can regain tone, so that it can pull from the inside up against the lumbar and therefore bring it back up and into neutral. And if it's doing its job from the inside, then the back muscles and the abdominal muscles, they can go back to moving you around from here to there and bending over and standing up straight, standing back up, or whatever. They're not performing a postural function if the deep front line is doing its function. But in many cases, or in most cases, it's not doing its function. It's become slack, and even worse is that the exercises prescribed to correct what the problem is are being directed at muscles or myofascial lines that really don't have anything to do with what the problem is. And I have seen very few examples where anyone has made any attempt at all to really try to bring tone back into the deep front line. And that's why we have HipSetter. HipSetter is able to, by its connection with the pubic symphysis, enable you to exercise the deep front line to add tone or tightness to it, so that it can provide support to the lumbar, and also in doing so, it will pull the pelvis out of what is an excessive anterior pelvic tilt. And it's doing so because there is a connection from the deep front line directly to the pelvis, and there's also a connection that supports the lumbar. So all in one move, when the deep front line tightens, let's say it's slack here, and then when it becomes tight, it's doing two things all at once. It's supporting the lumbar, which would get rid of some of the lumbar lordosis, but also with this second line attached to the pubic bone, It's tightening and pulling the pelvic girdle out of an excessive pelvic tilt. So this one line is doing two things that by and large are the problem with an anterior pelvic tilt. And it's doing it all at once with very little effort. The problem is that you just have to get to this thing, right? You have to get to it and be able to exercise it and activate it. And that's not an easy thing to do because this is in the deepest parts of your body. It's running along the inside of your spine, and then it's running down inside the pelvis. So there's no easy way to get to them. There's no exercise machine that I know of that directly can attach to the deep front line and exercise it except for HipSetter. That's what HipSetter actually does. It is able to connect to this line that intersects with the pubic symphysis. And this is where HipSetter connects to, and with a weight, we're able to add load to the pubic symphysis, which then instinctively causes the user to tighten this muscle here, which brings us out of an anterior pelvic tilt. And also, when this line of pull tightens, it also tightens against the lumbar, which again gets rid of some of the lordosis. So that's what HipSetter is doing, and that's how it actually works. It's not making any attempt at all to work with the external 11 myofascial lines. It's targeting the one myofascial line that nobody ever bothers to target because they really don't have a way to do it. But HipSetter is the way to do it. It's basically connecting directly to the front aspect of the deep front line where it connects with the pubic bone and allows a person to exercise this and to learn to feel what that feels like. What does it feel like when this engages? There is a feeling to it, and you will feel it deep inside the body.
Deeper inside than of course. The area I wasn't conscious of.
And also you'll feel it against your lumbar.
I feel all the joints, the lower back for me.
So how does your lower back feel right now?
Feels great.
So, and it has nothing to, your abs can be completely and totally relaxed, and your back muscles will not be involved at all. It's an internal feeling that you'll learn to feel when you use HipSetter.
I definitely feel like automatically my core is engaged right now.
Okay.
It's not something I'm really aware of before. Like now I know it's, or I can feel like it's on. And I'm not purposefully kind of like.
And once you learn what that feeling is and how to produce it, then you can produce it at will. So if you're doing the things that tend to cause the deep front line to lose its tone, like excessive sitting at your job or excessive sitting in school, studying or whatever, these are the things that tend to shut down the deep front line. And it's not so much sitting that is the problem, it's the problem of after the sitting, not having a way to re-engage the deep front line so that it can start doing its job again. Because basically it goes to sleep from excessive sitting, and then you get up and it's asleep and you don't have a methodology to wake it back up. So you start walking and the brain says, okay, something's not working there, so it has to shift function of the deep front line to the outer lines, and this becomes the new normal for you. And once it becomes the new normal, you have no ability to connect to this because you don't even know it's there, and you don't know how to connect to it unless something shows you how to connect to it. And again, that's what HipSetter is for. With HipSetter, it makes it very easy to reconnect and reestablish tone with the deep front line, and also to teach you how to actively engage the deep front line when necessary.